when you're asleep, it's kind of like a safe place for your mind to start experimenting a little bit with some stuff.
Why do we dream?
I think this is where I would say dreams are still one of the big unsolved mysteries of science. There's no one clear evidence-based reason why we dream. There are some good theories, though, and one theory is that we dream to help us prepare for things we might experience after we wake up. Another theory is just that we dream about whatever we have experienced, so this kind of continuity between what we experience in our lives and then that just appears in our dreams. Another theory is that dreams promote social bonding, and this is relevant to my own research. The idea is that we dream in order to make sense of our interpersonal relationships with other people, in particular, close friends, family members, romantic partners, that kind of thing.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that? That's one of those things like I know what that means, but I don't know what that means, if that makes any sense.
Well, one of the things that my research has revealed is that there's associations between people's interpersonal relationship variables like attachment style and the content of dreams. So when people feel more insecure in their romantic relationships, they tend to have more negative dreams about those partners, including things like jealousy and betrayal and conflict. And for people who feel more secure, they tend to have dreams, again, of those partners with themes of support and nurturance.
Which one's the chicken, which one's the egg? And as I said that, I don't really know actually which one came first. But what comes first? We dream about the negative interaction and then we have the negative interaction, or we have negative interaction and then we have the bad dream?
It's probably both. And part of my research has looked at the day-to-day experiences that people have in relationships and the dreams that they have. And we did find evidence that when people have a dream where there's some kind of negativity, some kind of conflict or infidelity, that does correlate with behaviors the next day. We can't say it causes necessarily because we didn't create those dreams. We didn't, manipulate people's minds to have one type of dream. But we can say that it predicts when people feel like less intimacy with their partners the next day after having a conflict dream, or more conflict after having a dream with jealousy in it, that kind of thing. But the other way is also something that we find some evidence for. So typically what we would say is that when people develop an attachment bond to someone, that is something that happens pretty early on in the long-term nature of the relationship. So if people are together for years, the attachment bond is something that develops early on, and that would predict when people have positive or negative dreams down the line. It's unlikely that the dream happened first in that case. So my answer to that question would be it's probably both.
That kind of, in my own personal life, right? Like I remember one time my wife and I loved this thing from Pizza Hut called the dinner box. It was a thing between us. And I had a dream that she got a dinner box without me. And I was mad at her for like 2 weeks. Like, why would you even do that? Is that the kind of thing that we're talking about? Like, I dreamed that you did something and now I'm mad at you about that.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. And this is maybe the part of my research that resonates most with people, because they express something similar to what you just described, where somebody does something to make you upset in the dream and then you wake up and feel upset about it. Sometimes it can be mild, sometimes it can be like the pizza box thing, but other times it can be more intense. Sometimes it can be dreams about betrayal or abandonment, and those can cause real conflict and real problems with people in relationships.
Is the dream trying to tell us something? Like, is there something there?
Yeah, so that's something that we don't know necessarily from from this line of research yet. Is what if anything, like what is objectively happening that the dreams could be trying to clue us in on. Sometimes that's probably true. If, let's say, somebody has been in a relationship with someone who has been unfaithful and then has dreams about it, then this dream could reflect the reality that they're experiencing. It could also reflect personal insecurities and anxieties that do not reflect the reality. So my guess is, again, it's probably both.
Yeah, that's tough, right? It's the answer is like sometimes you're imagining it and sometimes it's real.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how do you know the difference between one or the other?
So one way to answer that question would be to try to understand whether the dreamer has a personal history of feeling anxieties and insecurities in general in their life, because then it may not be specific to that person and that relationship. It could be that this is part of their more or less insecure personality type. And in that case, we would say maybe there's not something to be objectively concerned about.
Would you say kind of in general that our dreams are trying to tell us something?
Yes and no. I think there's a way to answer that question where the answer is yes, and I think that the yes answer involves people understanding their personal insecurities, or maybe not, maybe something positive about themselves that they hadn't been thinking about in their minds, or trying to remind them about these features of their life that they should be paying attention to. That being said, there's a way to interpret that where the answer is no, and that's something like, is the dream trying to warn us about something that will happen in the future, like a kind of prophetic dream? And that we don't have any evidence for.
If you're always thinking your spouse is cheating on you, then the dream about your spouse cheating on you probably says a lot more about you than the spouse.
Correct.
But if you suddenly have this dream, then maybe your subconscious is putting the pieces together. Is that a dramatic interpretation of it?
Yeah, and to your point, there are other studies that don't have to do with dreams about people's intuitions about their partners perhaps being unfaithful. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes those intuitions are correct in the case where someone's partner starts behaving very differently.
How, like, if you look kind of outside of like relationships, how else do dreams seem to affect us in our daily lives? Like when we wake up, how do the dreams that we have seem to affect us?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my research, being a social psychologist, my research does focus more on interpersonal relationships and social relationships. That being said, there are other studies from other laboratories showing that people can sometimes derive creative inspiration from their dreams. We do see that people who, they deal with things like computer science or physics or chemistry sometimes have dreams in those languages and wake up and they think, oh, this is cool. I'm going to try this as a potential solution to the problem that I've been working on. There's famous anecdotal examples like the scientist who invented the periodic table. Apparently, that came to him in a dream. Paul McCartney apparently dreamed the song Yesterday, and then woke up and wrote it down, and it became this classic song. So sometimes there's that. Sometimes there's some creative inspiration or problem solving or rehearsal, and so sometimes that can affect people after they wake up.
When we look at dreams, is the goal to dream, or is the dream a byproduct of something else that the brain is doing?
So that's one theory, is that the dreams are a byproduct of our brain kind of doing some kind of, information consolidation. So this is some, based on some work by neuroscientists and sleep researchers who argue that, when we sleep, our minds are kind of distilling important information, keeping the stuff that needs to be kept, and throwing away a lot of junk. And so the dream is our mind's way of trying to make sense of that process, which sometimes makes dreams feel bizarre. And then, a lot of it just gets thrown out because we generally don't remember most of our dreams, especially when you look at the research on night awakenings in the lab. that shows that when you actually get people to wake up in the middle of the night, most of the time they report being in the middle of a dream. But when people are sleeping at home, they might wake up from a dream briefly and then go right back to sleep and forget about it completely by the time they wake up. So a lot of the stuff that we dream about is not something that we're necessarily going to keep in our long-term memory. And that might reflect our mind's way of just kind of like consolidating and distilling information and throwing away a lot of the stuff that doesn't need to be kept.
I don't know if this relates directly to this, but something that we were talking about earlier. Like, I do remember being in school and learning Spanish. And when I started to really get into it, I started to dream in Spanish.
Yeah.
And then I felt like I could speak Spanish much better because I had dreamed it. Is that kind of a common thing, or like, I don't know what you're talking about, man?
Yeah, I've seen some good research coming out of my colleague Bob Stickgold's lab. He does studies where they give people some kind of task to work on in the lab. It could be like a puzzle or a maze or something, and then they'll have some people sleep. And if they report dreaming in the lab, then performance apparently goes up after having dreams that are relevant to what they're working on. So it could be like you're describing, people having dreams about something that's kind of like a process, like learning a language or a musical instrument, and it's part of the mind's way of like rehearsing and playing out the thing that you're learning. And yeah, then it could make it easier for you to continue doing well in that process.
Why are dreams like real but not real? In the sense that I'll be playing basketball at the place that I go and play basketball with, but in the audience is a shark and the basketball is a cake. Like, why is it real but not real?
So there's a few ways to answer that. One is that most dreams are actually pretty normal and mundane. And the reason why we have the stereotype of dreams as having all this bizarre stuff is because the bizarre stuff we're more likely to remember because it stands out relative to the kind of mundane stuff. So what I tell people is if you start keeping a regular nightly dream journal and you write down everything that's in your head immediately when you wake up, and you can't let, social media distract you. Like, you have to wake up and immediately write stuff down, otherwise you'll forget it. But if you get into the habit of doing that, and then you look back on your dreams over a few weeks, you'll see, most of it is just like, I'm going to the grocery store and work and hanging out with friends, and it's normal, and there's no sharks in the audience necessarily. That stuff does come up from time to time, but it's uncommon. And we don't necessarily realize that until we look at the whole picture. Now, when those bizarre elements do appear, sometimes those are explained by other things that we have experienced or encountered while we're awake. So if you have a dream that has dragons in it, maybe you were like, reading Harry Potter before going to bed or something like that. And, there's some aspect of what you've experienced in waking life that would explain why that dream element is there. It might seem a little bit out of place, but it's coming from somewhere that we can point to. And the third explanation is, that your mind is putting stuff together in a creative way, and it does seem bizarre and it does seem random, but when you're asleep, it's kind of like a safe place for your mind to start experimenting a little bit with some stuff. So it's like, okay, basketball, but let's throw in a shark and just see what happens. And, you're safe in the dream. Like, the shark's not going to get you. So that's kind of like, just a space for that kind of creative stuff to happen.
So it can be as simple kind of as like the shark is in the dream because I've been reading this book about the ocean recently, right, and the cake is in the dream because my son's birthday is coming up.
There you go.
Not because the cake is a symbol of the loss of my son's childhood as he turns 6, right? It's like, no, it's not that complicated.
That's a great point, and I want to double click on that because you might go to the bookstore and see a kind of dream encyclopedia book that tells you that there's a specific meaning, like if you dream of a cake it means this, and if you dream of a shark it means that. Total bunk. There's no one-to-one dream interpretation of those kinds of symbols.
Why does that stuff exist then? Like, why did we have such a, like, there has to be this deeper meaning to this?
Well, I mean, I think in general people have a tendency to look for meaning in things, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It can steer us in some pretty wacky directions, but that seems to me to be a feature of who we are as a species, I guess. We look for meaning in things, and it's fun too to think about, like, what this could mean, and if you have a dream about something, like what it reveals about you. It's a fun practice, and most of the time it's pretty harmless. I do advise people not to take that stuff too seriously, because we don't want people making any major life decisions based on something that's, not really evidence based.
Do people dream differently, or do we all kind of dream the same?
Well, there are some pretty normative common features of dreams. So going back to what we were talking about earlier that is relevant to my research, dreams are very social. And this is, I think, an underappreciated aspect of dreams. Most of the time, when people dream, they're dreaming about other people, especially familiar people, people that they're close to and interact with regularly, in settings that are familiar and that they interact in regularly. So that tells us something about, I guess, quote unquote, normal dreams that most people have, that tend to be centered around those things.
Um, are you ready for some harder slash listener submitted questions?
Let's do it.
Most common dream.
Well, in general, there's things that I hear from people a lot. The common dream is the teeth falling out dream. And so a lot of people report having that type of dream. A lot of people have dreams where they're, running, sometimes falling. And other than that, I would say, like, just the mundane stuff that we talked about. So going to work and hanging out with friends and doing chores, those are the kinds of things that those are the most common types of dreams.
For some reason, that makes me sad that most of my dreams are just like boring. Like, I could be doing all these adventures and I'm still just going to the grocery store. like,
Yeah, well, that's where lucid dreaming comes in. So when people have lucid dreams, then they are aware of the fact that they're in a dream while they're in it, and then they have more control. So then they can, for lucid dreaming, that opens up a whole world of possibilities.
I don't know if that's ever happened to me. Is that a common thing or not?
It is
Very
relatively common. So if you ask people, have you ever had this type of dream? A lot of people will say, sure, I've had that happen before. I wouldn't say it's common for people to have regularly. So I've had them in my life. I've had them more like years ago. I don't have that many now. And that may be due to normative changes in my sleep cycles. For instance, my whole sleep routine changed dramatically when my daughter was born. So
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
I don't think I'm ever going back to how it
Mhm.
was before that.
As a father of two, you're not.
But lucid dreaming is definitely achievable. It's one of the things where, you kind of have to train yourself a bit to recognize when you're dreaming. And one of the routines that people will who research this will suggest using is something called mnemonic induced lucid dreaming, where you're trying to trigger your mind to recognize when you're dreaming with a mnemonic device. So you might, for example, train yourself to think about something like a cat or a lamp or something throughout the day. And then if you see that in your dream, or if you think about it, then you'll realize that you're dreaming. Another technique is called wake back to bed. And I remember using this when I was younger. You wake up in the middle of the night from sleep, and sometimes if you're able to recall a dream, then you kind of intend to go back into the dream when you go back to sleep. And if you can get back into that dream space, then you're more likely to become lucid. Apparently, mindfulness meditation is another way to develop lucidity. You're kind of training your conscious focus on the momentary experience. And if you look at Buddhist practitioners and meditators all over the world who do this like regularly, all day, every day, they will describe the dream state as a kind of sleep yoga where they're practicing mindfulness essentially while they're sleeping. So that's kind of what it means to be in a lucid dream state. You're aware of what your conscious mind is really doing in that moment.
I guess what's the point? Like, do we unlock a new super? Like, all I can think of is I'm an anime person. Like, do we level up? Or just like, no, you kind of just know you're dreaming, and that's kind of it. Like, is there a broad, like, I guess what's the point?
I mean, I think that depends on the person, and for some people, it's just, I'm gonna do some fun stuff while I'm sleeping, and it's better than going to the grocery store. Like, I'll play basketball with LeBron James in my dream, and just have fun. And for some people, it could be trying to unlock something, especially if they have, had some trauma or something really negative in their life that they want to try to work through. Lucid dreaming could be a path to doing that. There's, I think there's a world in which dreams of that nature can be therapeutic. That being said, it really is idiosyncratic based on individual desires and needs.
Yeah. That'd be pretty awesome if I could train myself to just fly around the world.
Right.
That's what I would want to be doing. But I could see that being really addictive.
Well, there's no way to be addicted to sleep. You're gonna have to wake up and go about your day at some point. So,
yeah. This kind of hints at a little bit of a question that we have. It's like, is it real? In the sense that if your mind, like, we're all kind of experiencing the world around us in our minds. So if we're experiencing the dream in our mind, does it make the dream real in a way?
Well, if it's in your mind, then I would say it is real.
Yeah. Right. It's real, but not reality, if that makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah.
Are dreams fundamentally different than nightmares? Or a nightmare is just a scary
good question.
Dream?
Personally, I mean, there's no objective definition of what a nightmare is. I mean, we know what a nightmare is because somebody tells us that they had a nightmare. Otherwise, the same person could potentially have the same dream as another person and not call it a nightmare. They would just call it a regular dream. So you could think about a nightmare as something that people just subjectively identify. And there are, features of nightmares that are a little bit different in the clinical population. So for somebody who has had a traumatic event, they are more likely to have recurring dreams of that event. That being said, we generally tend to have a little bit more negative emotion than positive emotion in our dreams anyway. And I wouldn't say that makes the majority of people's dreams nightmares. I would just say that those emotions are more salient in dreams that we normally have. So to answer your question, I would say in most cases, dreams and nightmares, there's kind of, very fine line between those things, and we could maybe just group them together. That being said, at the extreme end where people are really suffering from distress, I would say that's a very different thing, and that we would definitely call those nightmares.
Why do we have more negative emotions than positive emotions in dreams? That's just who we are.
Well, it could be more of we're trying to plan ahead, think about things that might happen and deal with them preemptively. I mean, that's one of the other things, again, putting dreams aside for a second, that's one of the things that makes us such a successful species, is that we're able to think 12 moves ahead in life and plan for things like, we're going to get snow in a little bit. So how do we deal with that before it happens? And maybe there's a meteor that'll hit Earth in, the year 2032 or something. And how are we going to deal with that? So those things are, they can be unpleasant to an extent. It requires thinking ahead to potential things that could hurt us and dealing with them. So if that theory of dreams is correct, then it would make sense for us to have a little bit more negativity than positivity, in terms of emotions in our dreams. That's not to say there's no positivity. There certainly is, but it would make sense to think ahead about what could go wrong tomorrow so I can deal with it now. And in fact, I think anecdotally, a lot of people will report experiencing that in their day-to-day lives. Like, oh, I had this dream and I realized I had to deal with it, and I woke up and I dealt with it.
And I saw that thing about the meteor hitting or asteroid or whatever we
Right,
call it.
right,
Like it's like no, that those odds are going up or
right.
going down. They're like it's 1 in 40, it's 1 in 32. Like
Yeah.
good. Oh well, that's good. Have you ever ran across somebody that just didn't? They just didn't dream.
It is possible. I don't know anyone personally, but it is possible for someone to not dream. We psychologists used to believe that if you did not have the ability to dream, that you couldn't be alive. But that has been debunked as well. There are people, and it's very, very rare, but there are a non-zero number of people in the world who will not dream, and they're fine.
But when you look like I don't know if you've done this or not, but if you look at somebody's brain while they're dreaming, like what's happening up there? Is it just all over the place, or no? This is confined in a certain area of the brain.
Well, I'm not a neuroscientist, so my answer is going to be a bit limited there, but I think in many ways, brain activity is similar to the kinds of things that people would experience while they're awake. And there is more, for example, there is more oxytocin and vasopressin, which are involved in social bonding, which kind of, in a way, supports my earlier theory of dreams being these methods for us to have more connection to other people, the facilitating of attachment bonds. So it could be that that's the reason why we have dreams that are kind of social in nature, is because of the increased levels of oxytocin and vasopressin in the brain.
What is the single most interesting thing about dreams?
The most interesting thing about dreams. Well, I think it's the mysterious quality of dreams, that there's potential for anything that we could experience, we can have in our dreams, and it's almost limitless. We can have dreams that are otherworldly. We could have dreams about, the afterlife, or those, who are deceased. We could have dreams about people that we've never met. We could have dreams where we're fulfilling our dreams in a kind of in an abstract sense, like we're fulfilling our dreams in our dreams. So yeah, they're just very magical.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. Like, it's kind of cool to play basketball with a shark. I'm not gonna lie to you, it was pretty fun. Do they seem to motivate us or distract us?
Well, maybe neither. I mean, I think so. This is one other area where I would say, as a society, I don't think Americans place that much value in their dreams overall, relative to maybe other societies. I think we tend to not put that much stock into our dreams. We don't feel very motivated or distracted by them, I think. And that's probably especially true with people now in the age of kind of ubiquitous technology, because like I was saying before, if you wake up and you're just immediately plugged into whatever is going on in your devices, then you're not really thinking about your dreams and taking them seriously. I've actually, so I'm collecting some data now on the people who are participating in the study that I'm running are college age students, and I've noticed that overall they're less likely to report having dreams than in some of the past samples that I've collected, and I think that's because they're not really taking the time to think about their dreams after waking up. So I have to kind of go an extra step to make sure that they disconnect from their devices and give them like a pad of paper and a pen to write down their dreams so that we know that we can get them. So yeah, I think overall, probably neither. Neither motivated or distracted.
Man, that is an existential crisis in the sense that like modern society has killed our dreams. Like, oh,
But
you didn't.
we're not doomed. We can focus on our dreams anytime we want to, and we just need to make that choice. And we still have paper and pencil journals. Like I still have them. I still use them. And or just put your phone on airplane mode and make sure nothing comes in until you write it down, and then you have it.
What's the big thing that we're still trying to learn about dreams?
For me, the next link in the dream research would be to try to figure out, like you said before, the chicken or the egg. So is it the dream that is playing a key role in the formation of social bonds? Or is it the bond that forms first and then the dreams come after? And how do those things interconnect with each other? Like, I would love to know, for instance, whether when people meet, let's say, friends or romantic partners, how those dreams change over the course of that bond being actually formed. And then how does that implicate the long-term stability and success of those relationships? So do dreams tell us something about who is more likely to stay together versus who's more likely to break up in a romantic relationship? We still don't know. I mean, I don't know that that's the burning question on every scientist's mind who's interested in dreams, but those are, I guess, some of my burning questions.
That's pretty much all the questions we got. What's kind of coming up next for you? What are you working on? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, we're trying to collect some data now, and hopefully we'll have a good sample of people who are actually reporting dreams consistently, and we'll be able to look at some of those data. I'm trying to see what other types of personality traits are connected to people's dreams. So that work is in process. It's ongoing, and I hope to have something to show for it, within the year.